So I'm here today with Aymeric. Aymeric is a cybersecurity consultant, an expert, and also trainer. He's worked with some massive organizations, including Thalis over here in Europe. Today we're going to be discussing some of the things around securing this software development life cycle. So I guess a good place to start, Aymeric, is what are some of the statistics? You know, these can always be terrifying when we're looking at cybersecurity, but you know, when we're talking to developers, what are some of the key stats that we're seeing and the trends of cybersecurity at the moment?
There are a lot of attacks in 2019 and other years, of course. All these attacks, organizations say a great part of these attacks are about software security. So there is vulnerabilities in softwares, web applications or not, and this is the entry point, the cause of the attack. This is the first point. In source code, we can see that GitLab made a report in 2020, and they analyzed all the repo on gitlab.com, and 18% of this repo has secret issues. So hard-coded secrets or API keys or tokens or something. We can think that web application security is improving, but it's not. But Acunetics says that applications protected by vulnerability scanner are becoming more secure. So we need to include stuff in our SDLC to protect our applications, and the overall security will be better.
It's some crazy statistics here. 18% of repos have secrets inside them, and it's the kind of the state of the world at the moment, and particularly in not just public repos but also private repos. And I always like to think of Uber when we're talking about hard-coded secrets, because they've had an attack because someone hard-coded secrets in a public repository, and then also they've had an attack because someone gained access to their private repositories where hard-coded secrets were. So I mean, it's such a simple thing not to hard-code secrets, yet it's so complicated, as we can see, because there's such a widespread problem. So why don't we also talk a little bit about what is the software development lifecycle? How can we break this into chunks that we can use to trigger different security events?
Yes. Without talking about security in software development lifecycle, there are generally 5 parts. The first part is about define what you need. You have to say, okay, I need an e-commerce website that sells, I don't know, stuff, and we need to build this website for March 2021, for example. This is the first part. In this step, we define some requirements, functional and non-functional requirements. So this is the first part, to define the need. After, we need to do the architecture. You need to plan, make foundations of the software, and we need to translate the business needs in technical plans. It's like building a house. We need to make plan before build a wall. Right after architecture, there is a translation of this plan into applications or different components or something. We need to build the walls of the house. When the software is finished, or at least version 1, we need to do some tests to ensure everything is going okay before going to production in a functional and non-functional way. We need to test that features are present and test that there are no bugs or security hole or something. And when it's done, we need to go to production, and there is a maintenance plan when we need to ensure that the application is running well in production. There is no down and everything's okay, performance are okay. This is the 5 parts of SDLC, classical SDLC. If you are in agile or other project management processes, it doesn't impact the SDLC.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, as a developer myself, sometimes you skip all steps and just start, but it's never a good plan. So, how does this kind of translate into security? When we, if we take a look here at these different steps, what are some of the different things that we need to look for?
Yes,
as we're going through the software development lifecycle.
Yes, it's important to note that there are stuff to do at each step, from the beginning to the end. So if we take the first part, definition of need, we need to think about what security do we need for this application. It depends on the context. It's not the same if you are in Showcase website and if you deal with military or banking stuff, of course. And you need to think about possible threats. Maybe it's a state, maybe it's other companies, maybe I don't know. And in this step, like I said before, you define features. And you define maybe kind of user stories, global at least. And maybe to improve security, you can think about abuser stories. It's not thinking about thinking like a classical and normal user, but think as an attacker. The threat modeling phases is in this step and in the architecture step, because in the first step, definition of need, we haven't enough elements to define everything. So it's between these two parts. In the architecture phase, you build plans, and depending on the context, you need to set up and to imagine security measure that can be set up to ensure everything is okay about security. So you need to make the architecture and share the architecture to ensure everything is okay. And share and validate the architecture, of course. You also need to define some security requirements. Like I said before, there are functional and non-functional requirements. In non-functional requirements, there are security requirements. And once again, it's about the context of the application, but it's about we need to set up a TLS connection on every flows of the application, for example. Development steps. Developers need to think about security all the time. It's important. The goal of all these things is to shift left security. You can't build something and at the end say, oh, I need to make some security tests to ensure it's okay. It's too late, and it will take times to fix it and break and rebuild and something. So you have to think of security from the beginning, from the definition of need, architecture, and developers need to think about security all the time when they are writing code. For this, they can do code reviews, and they can use some scanning tools, static or dynamic, analyze dependencies. It's a big part. And they can implement abuser stories we defined earlier. In the test step, you have to validate that security is okay. It's too late to think about security, but you have to validate at this step. So we can do, again, dynamic security tests, pen testing with hackers, and we have to check that all security requirements are okay. And in the final step, in the release step, you have to deploy the application on server or cloud or I don't know. This step is very important because you can have a very secure application, but if you deploy this application on insecure environment, it's like you don't have a secure application. So this is the first part. And the second part is about response plan. It's when there is an attack, you have to execute a procedure to ensure the service are still okay and to ensure you won't remove stuff that can be useful for forensic, for example. This is all the elements we can say about the steps in SDLC.
It's really interesting what you say too about shifting left. I mean, and moving the security process to the beginning of it. It's I've built applications before that are vulnerable by design, and there's really nothing that you can do in the later stages. But I mean, kind of go back to that beginning, and it's a horrible feeling, and you feel and you face a lot of resistance to it. So, that concept, what you mentioned, shifting left, getting that security right from that definition of scope, thinking about it then, it makes such a difference to the long term. And I mean, I have some virtues, but patience is not one of them. And you kind of need to take a step back as a developer a lot of the time and slow yourself down and just say, okay, no, let's plan this out. Let's build some plans before we start laying bricks, which can be frustrating, but it's by far will save you some headaches later on. So, what are some of the prerequisites that developers should face? Where can developers go to find some knowledge and some training, or what should we do to kind of start this journey?
So there are different types of applications. So web developers and mobile developers and heavy application developers. So I focused on web because it's, I think, the most type of application. So OWASP is a reference. There are a lot of stuffs, cheat sheets, very interesting cheat sheet. They present the OWASP top 10, which it's released every, 3 or 4 years. And it presents the main vulnerabilities found in applications. So for example, the first one is injection. So there are SQL injection, code injection, JavaScript injection, and so on. So it's interesting to not become an expert on these vulnerabilities, but to know they exist. It's a good start. Globally, when you want to implement secure SDLC, you have to train people from project manager, developer, tester. It's required because if people don't understand risks and potential impacts, it won't work. So one thing that works with developer is demonstration. I made this in a previous life. With developers, you take a tool like BIF. I don't know if you know BIF. It's a tool to present XSS injection, and there is a payload, and you build a fake website with comments, vulnerable comments, and you put XSS in it. And BIF is a web portal, and when a victim goes to the website, it appears on the portal, and you can do action on his computer, like turn on webcam and do screenshot, and so many functionalities. And it works because developers say, oh my god, if I don't build a secure comment module in my website, it can happen. Things like that can happen. So it works. It also works with project manager and tester, but for developers, they see that, oh my god, it's not possible. We can do that with a malicious JavaScript. So it works. One other thing is which work is talking about a recent big attack. You talked earlier about Uber. It works. You say, if you don't protect your Git repo and if you use hard-coded secrets, you can lose millions and data can leak. So it works for developers to change their mindset and say, okay, I need to take care about security and I need to build secure stuff. Yeah,
that makes sense. And there's definitely there's definitely been some pivotal moments in kind of my journey when you hear about these attacks, and then you kind of look at your own infrastructure and your own code, and you go, "Oh, yeah, thank goodness no one found mine." And so moving on, like what are some of the challenges and requirements that we face in the context of application? How do we start to overcome those challenges when we're kind of still in that early planning stage of our applications?
The first step is to think about the context. Like I said before, you don't need to apply the same things in a showcase website and in a health website or military website. So you have to adapt security to the context. It's the most important thing. And next, you can list things. You can say, okay, is my application public, internet-facing application, or it's private? And I have to think, okay, I have data. So my data, is this medical banking or some military data? Is this interesting for attacker? And what level of security do I need to put in place to secure this data? So I have to set up requirements about DICT. So it's in French. It's availability, integrity, confidentiality, and traceability. So you say, okay, I have this kind of data. What do I need to put in place to ensure confidentiality is okay for this kind of data? Do I need to track all access to this data? It's the T of DICT. And you need to list all these requirements about the context, depending on the context.
Yeah. So starting off and really understanding the different needs for it. I can tell from experience that after you've built an application, if you then want to become HIPAA compliant, if you've got medical data that's transitioning, it's very hard to do afterwards once you've built something. We had an application that was meant to be social. It started being used for medical purposes, and we had to change everything. So having a think, and I think it's important in that regards to not think about, okay, what is the use case immediately, but what is the potential use cases that this might involve? And I think thinking long term in that too, going, okay, so today it's going to be a social app, but the ambition of it is to become more than that, to become clinical, and understanding, at least knowing what the changes that you need to make for that. For sure. It's very interesting what you're saying.
Yes. Just one more thing about security requirements. If you don't have requirements and you don't know how to start, OWASP again, set up a project called ASVS, Application Security Verification Standard. It's a list of requirements divided in 3 levels. So level 1 is classical application, like showcase applications, and level 3 is critical application. So you can take this list, and it's a good start. You can adapt, of course, but it's a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. A great resource to check out for sure.
Yes.
Now, one of the interesting things that you mentioned when we're talking about the software development lifecycle was the threat modeling and kind of how that sits in between a couple of stages. What's the main goals that we're trying to achieve when we're kind of going about this threat modeling, and how do we start in that?
The main goal is it's easier to implement the good thing to ensure security when you know what you risk. In threat modeling, you have to do several things. You have to list potential threats. So you can say, okay, my business is very concurrential, and maybe other companies have interest to steal my data to to be better than me on this business, or maybe I'm dealing with money, or I don't know, so we can steal stuff either. So voilà. So you have to list your potential threats and the interesting assets you have. So you can say, okay, I have a public website, and I have a database, and I have other components. What are my critical assets? So my critical assets are potentially my database, because there are millions of customer data, for example. So you have to identify which assets need to be protected, and particularly protect. It's the good time to say, okay, I have a public website, so maybe people can attack me from the internet. This website access a database, and the database maybe is it's accessible from my internal network. Are there potential insider that can access my database, and is there an interest for us to attack this database and steal data? You have to think about every possible scenarios that can happen after plan what you can set up to reduce the risk of this threat.
It's really interesting what you say about the internal threats too. I think sometimes we focus on building this huge security around this huge wall around our infrastructure, and outsiders can never get in, and insiders are never a threat. But the reality is so different. We have to change our mindset a little bit to think about the internal. It's just a very interesting point that you bring up, that insiders can, when we're doing threat modeling, we have to think of these scenarios of people inside us, disgruntled employees that have access still to the database, the different scenarios.
Yes, people don't think about zero trust. They think that, okay, we put a firewall or a WAF in front of my website and it's okay, but after this WAF and firewall, everything is open. You can access the database and the printer and, I don't know, the file share. And
absolutely. When one of discussing with some pen testers, some of the favorite playbooks are to try and get access to the internal Slack messaging systems to find secrets, or the internal messaging system to find secrets, and then so often the infrastructure is so easy to then move laterally between. You start off in Slack, and then you might find keys to get into the cloud infrastructure. You might find keys to get into databases from there and move through, because there's no protections that once an insider has authenticated themselves, that they could still be a potential threat.
Yeah. And
architecture for me is a daunting subject. Having to think about the design and how things move together. So when we're talking about architectural reviews, what are we really trying to look for? What are some of the biggest pitfalls that appear when we're looking for vulnerabilities in our architecture?
Yes. You have to keep in mind that architects need to know a lot of things and can't be experts, especially on security. They have to be good in performance stuff, scaling stuff, security stuff, developing stuff, and everything. So it's hard for us to design a security plan. When the architecture is done, documents are written, they can be presented, shared to other people, other architects and security guy, and maybe experts, network, or I don't know, system experts. And the main goal is to ensure there are no bad patterns in place, and the architecture is okay with security requirements. One example maybe is communication. We talked just earlier about zero trust, and it's like you build wall and inside wall everything is open. There are architects that think that that think walls are enough. So they put security elements in front of application, and put nothing after, and say, okay, it's secure for me. And the architecture review is there to say, no, it's not enough. You have to put TLS connection between your components inside the internal network, and you have to put authentication on each component called during the HTTP call, for example, etc., etc. One other goal is to not reinvent stuff. Maybe you can say, okay, I think this architecture will respond to my needs, but maybe some existing patterns, and I don't know how to say, but non-patterns and used patterns with by other users are okay to do that, and you don't need to reinvent this kind of architecture. It's kind of a stamp you put and say, okay, it's validated. My architecture is okay and is respond to my security needs.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and a shout out to all the architects out there who deal with this. We appreciate you. That's for sure. Do we, when we're looking at architecture, do we really need to review this? Is this something that we do once at the planning stages, and or do we need to update our architectural review? Do we need to look back at this when new threats come up? Is this something we do once, or do we do this regularly?
You have to do it regularly, because when there is a big change or breaking change in your architecture or in your application, maybe it implies new threats or new risk, and you have to review it and say, okay, this thing is new. What are consequences? Maybe it's new facing endpoint, or I don't know, new features, and it's a new gift for attackers. They say, oh, okay, you can attack it. So the best thing to do is to review regularly architecture, of course.
Yeah, I like that. So as you just said, a gift for attackers. We're trying to avoid. That's good. I think that describes it perfectly. Okay, so we've just discussed architectural reviews. Now, what should we look for when reviewing the codes? Now, this is something that developers should be familiar with, that we do review each other's codes at different stages, but sometimes we're not looking for security flaws in those reviews. What should we look for in code reviews to try and identify some vulnerabilities?
Yes. So to begin, there are different levels of maturity in code reviews. So level 0, no code review, of course. First level is code review between developers, and the next level is code review about security. It's about functionality and everything that's beside level 2. But what's one thing which is important is to deal with business workflow, because it's one of things that is very difficult for tools to detect. So other developers and security guys in the same team, in the same context, who know about features and business, they are aware of it. They can say, okay, the data come from this, and this function, and this function, and this function. But maybe if I send this kind of payload, I don't go this way, but another way, which is vulnerable, and it's a business vulnerability. One of the stupid example is a banking website. Okay, I don't know the word in English, but you can send money to another people from my bank account to yours. Okay, I said, okay, I have 100 euros on my account. I send you 90 euros. Everything okay. What happens if I send you minus 50 euros? I don't know, maybe I have plus 50 euros on my bank account and you minus 50 euros. I don't know. It's a business vulnerability. Tools can't detect this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because there's nothing wrong with the code. There's nothing wrong with the code. That's why a tool wouldn't pick it up.
Yes.
Maybe you want to have that functionality. A tool can't pick up that logic, behind it. I think that's you say it's a silly example, and hopefully it wouldn't happen in this context. I think it describes it really well. Is that is a vulnerability in the logic behind it, in the business workflow, as you say.
Exactly.
Exactly. And I think that's just kind of the rule of code reviews too, is that we're looking for logic flaws, but and this is what we should really be looking out for.
Exactly.
When we're talking about the code reviews, I find it interesting that some people, when you talk to them, or as when I talk to people about leaking secrets in source code, they talk about how the code reviews will pick up these things. This is why we have them in place. But what's outside of the scope? What's not important to start to worry about it in the code review, and what should we use other tools for?
When developers talking each other, they can be kind of troll about, you name your variable like this, and I don't like it, it's not good. Okay, I use spaces or indentation to indent my code, or my bracket is on the line and not in the line below. And it's not important, especially in security, and it takes a lot of time. And there can be debate for hours about it's snake case or camel case, or okay, we don't care, guys. It's important to have a code style guideline in a team. But you have to set this kind of guideline before and respect it in the team. But it's a waste of time in code reviews to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I always like to use the example of particularly some things that code reviews are not good at, is kind of looking at the history of stuff. When we talk about credentials being leaked, we know that the credential is a risk, no matter how far back in the history it's been leaked, if it's still active. And if you have 100 commits and you're merging into a main branch, then you're probably not going to go back and review every single commit that someone has made in the code review. But there could be a secret 50 commits back that So there's some things we want to use tools for, and then there's some things that tools cannot pick up. And I think that's the important distinction you've made.
Yes, you have to focus on logic, I think.
Right, but now that I guess we can start looking into some of these tools that going past that logic, there's obviously some things that are much better detected in tools than manually going through. So the static analysis, which we've mentioned in the code, why should we be using static analysis? Why is it better at detecting some vulnerabilities over code reviews?
Like you said, hard-coded secret, 50 commits back. A SAST tool is more effective than human, and code reviews take times to do, and static analysis can be automated and run in CI/CD pipelines, or every night, or I don't know. So it's easier and costless to run this kind of tool. The drawback with static analysis is the number of false positives, because it's static. So depending on technology, maybe there is, a dependency injection with some dependencies and libraries loaded at runtime, and static analysis tools can't understand what happens at runtimes. It's static by definition. So they can report a lot of false positive, and it takes so many times to analyze the report. and say, okay, this one is a true positive, and this one is a false positive, and again. It's useful, but from my opinion, you have to use it with parsimony. You don't have to say, okay, I run my SaaS tool at every commit, and I have a report every time I commit my code. It's not possible. You spend your time to analyze the report. It's not productive, from my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes back to kind of the analogy. If you put too much roadblocks in front of someone, then they just bypass it and the tool becomes completely useless anyway. And, it's that challenge between, okay, we don't want to miss vulnerabilities, we want to capture all that we can, but we want to have, the highest precision and the highest recall possible, but it's probabilistic. That is that with static analysis, we can't always get the right answer because we can't verify it a lot of the time. It just goes against. It just goes back into it. So it's true. We need to be careful. We can't just apply static analysis everywhere throughout the program. And using the example of secrets detection, as you know, it's where I spend a lot of my time and work. There's a line in the sand that you have to draw between what amount of false positives is acceptable and can we accept, and what amount is going to disrupt the workflow so much that no one wants to use it. And that becomes the challenge with static analysis, knowing where to put it. What are some tools that you recommend when looking at static analysis that are quite well represented?
I didn't test everything, of course.
Why not? Come on.
So the one I know the best is checkmarks, which is very good. There are lacks of pertinence about some technologies. For example, it is very useful for Java technology. But not in JavaScript. So maybe there are other tools to analyze JavaScript. Checkmarks is not free; it's commercial product. There are free tools. I don't remember the name at the moment, but there are tools on GitHub you can try.
Yeah, and I think the tools also depend too on the type of program. Some of the open source tools may be fantastic for developers working on smaller projects and smaller teams. And but when we get into that scale, then we need to start implementing tools like checkmarks that are those commercial applications that have higher recall and higher precision, perhaps. Now, there's one vulnerability that has a little bit more certain when we're trying to detect them is dependency vulnerabilities. So, I think I've read somewhere that, that 95% of the code that you have in your application is comes in from packages and dependencies and other tools that we don't actually write ourselves. So, how concerned should we be with the having vulnerabilities as part of our dependencies in our projects?
Dependencies is a big problem.
All right, let's move on.
It's a big problem, especially in technologies like JavaScript and Java, because, for example, in JavaScript you have a dependency and a package for everything. I don't know, to parse XML you have dependencies. To parse everything you have dependencies, and sometimes the dependency code is 3 lines of code, and you have a lot of dependencies. And dependencies have dependencies, which have dependencies extra. So it's very hard, and your project folder is very heavy. It's kind of problem, and you can't monitor all versions and vulnerable versions of these dependencies. Like you said, it's about 80% or 90% of code in an application, and it's huge. So you have to take care about your dependencies. there are tools for that, and pertinent tool. I think the most known tool is dependency check from OWASP. It's a one-shot tool. You run the tool and get XML or HTML report, I think. It's new. The new version is called Dependency Track. It's more modern. It's a web portal which with API, and it's better, and it can be integrated again in the CI/CD pipelines. The problem with dependencies, like I said, there are dependencies and multi-level dependencies, and you can have the same dependencies multiple times with different versions, and that's a problem. And what can we do if a suite of dependencies at the third level is vulnerable? Okay, I have to. I can't update this dependency because it depends on the parent one and etc. So okay, I have to wait for the parent dependency to be updated, or I have to remove this dependency and use another one. It's very difficult because I think it's impossible to have a project with zero dependency vulnerabilities. It's not possible.
Yeah, I mean that's right, and vulnerabilities that haven't yet been discovered in dependencies. It's for
yes.
It's a. I think what's important about this one is it's a never-ending
yes.
process. We need to constantly be aware of this.
And there is another problem is that you can have a vulnerable function in dependencies, and these functions are not called in your implementation.
Right.
Yes, and you say, okay, but how do we know that this function, vulnerable function, is called or not? It's a problem, and it's even more a problem if this dependency is at the third or fourth level. So there are runtime analysis about dependencies. I mentioned sneak. I don't know how to pronounce in English, if it's snake or sneak. I don't know. In French,
I don't think anyone knows. I say sneak. So. You stand that up to not spelling words correctly.
So sneak.
We'll go with sneak. Spell it all correct. Yes.
Okay. Yes. So with sneak, for example, they can analyze your Git repo to find okay, I have this dependency with this version and it's vulnerable. That's one thing. But they have another functionality which is a little agent you can deploy on your application. It's a dependency you can put in your application. And the goal is to deploy this application on not in production, of course, but in an environment used for functional testing. So you deploy this application with this agent. You run your functional test, automated or not, never mind. And the agent analyze and report if there are vulnerable function called during functional testing. So it's very useful to change the priority of things to do when updating dependencies. It's very useful.
Yeah, that's great. Dependency defined dependency vulnerabilities. Getting deep into the matrix, but yeah, no, there are some cool, some fantastic features out there from Sneak and from other ones. I know that GitHub's really trying to play in this space now. I don't think they quite have the functionality of some of the other guys like Sneak, but it's good to see companies like GitHub putting in these automated checks so that developers that don't necessarily know enough to get Sneak and start scanning still get some alerts. But it's as we say, it's a huge problem. I think 80% of the code we don't write ourselves, so 80% of the code we have little control over. So we need to make sure that we act and patch regularly. Now, moving along, we've talked about static analysis, and which obviously looks through our code to find vulnerabilities in there. But what's the difference between dynamic analysis and how do these differentiate?
Static is about code, of course, and dynamic is when you have deployed your application on testing environment, and you begin to you start the dynamic tool. The dynamic tool basically in web application, if it's a front application, for example, okay, go to the URL, the page, okay, there is an input search stuff. Okay, we can change the pages of comments in URL, and it's a query string parameter called p equal and the page number. Okay, it lists all possible inputs of the page, and it tries to inject payload. So it's not malicious payload, of course, but it's alert hello, for example, in JavaScript. So it really send requests to the website, and it analyze response and say, okay, I send this payload. In the response, the payload is intact. It's not encoded, or it's not filtered, or it's not removed, or I don't know. So I think there is potential XSS vulnerability in this page. For API, it works almost the same way. You can give the tool a Swagger file or postmark collection or a list of endpoint or API definition, and it takes, okay, first endpoint, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 parameters. I will try to inject payload in parameters and check what are response and define if it's vulnerable or not.
So in a way, it's kind of almost acting as like a malicious actor, but without a malicious intent. Trying to exploit these vulnerabilities.
Yes, but a dumb hacker, because it's not. There are no logic. You find something, you try to inject. You find something, you try to inject. You don't think about, okay, there are this field. And maybe if I combine this payload with another payload, and I can chain multiple vulnerabilities to find something. It's just one input, one payload, check the response, and define if it's vulnerable or not. The main advantage against static analysis is there are fewer false positives. Because, like I said, dynamic tool sends the request and checks the response. So in the report, there are a proof of concept of the problem. I send a quote, alert, JavaScript alert, hello, and in the response, I have the same thing. So you can replay requests to find to reproduce the problem.
There's some limitations too, as you say. It's a dumb hacker. I like that. And I guess that these tools are fantastic, but I guess what that illustrates is that this doesn't replace the need for pen testing. For example, it doesn't replace it. We should have these in place, but we can't always rely on tools to find everything.
Again, it's less expensive than pen test, and you can run it again and again in pipelines, so CI/CD pipelines. So, yes. And
now, moving along to kind of like more infrastructure, you said way back at the beginning when we were talking about the software development lifecycle that we can have the most secure app in the world, but if we get our configurations wrong, it's all for nothing. So. How can misconfigured infrastructure really result in breaches and hacks? And what can we do to kind of maybe avoid this? What's the answer?
So some examples are, for example, I set up, MySQL database, and I let the default account. I let my SSH server to allow root account to connect. I set up I don't know, any component with default, maybe in default account, or I didn't disable a useless service. Maybe I have a very secure application, like you say, and I have, I don't know, anonymous FTP server accessible from the outside the server. So it's very important to check everything is secured and hardened when you deploy your application. To avoid this kind of problem, you can define two things. The first one is automating deployments. Most of the time, error in configurations is because of human error. I have forgotten to disable the service. I have forgotten to. So if it's automated, you have to define a recipe or I don't know a procedure. You give it to the tool, and the tool executes it, and it doesn't make error. So it's better. If it's not possible, you can set up checklist, and you have to check each line to ensure you haven't forgotten something.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of hype around some of these like automated deployments.
Yes.
I hear a lot of the stuff about GitOps, and we can deploy 4 trillion times a day. We're using GitOps and YAML files and other declarative infrastructure. Do these things help when we're deploying out our infrastructure on that automation side? That like to prevent the human errors that you're talking about?
Yes, it can. It can, but if you don't define well this recipe, you set up in GitOps or YAML, it will not work better. If this kind of tool is not well configured, it will not help.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I hear a lot in the in the news when I'm hearing about breaches that everything seems to fall back. I hear a lot misconfigured S3 bucket in Amazon. Why? What is it with Amazon S3 buckets and them always being misconfigured? How can we avoid this? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I'm not sure either.
Everyone is using AWS S3 buckets, so the probability of error are higher, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It just always seems to be the thing of what led to a breach, a misconfigured S3 bucket. I really don't know how these things can be so badly configured all the time. But while we're talking about incidents and breaches, okay, having an incident response plan, it's not something that we always want to think about. What happens when when everything all fails and a bad guy gets in? But when should we put an incident response plan in place, and at what level should we have these at the organization level, at the project level, both of them? What should we be looking for in an incident response plan?
Yes. So the first thing is, if you don't plan anything before the attack, when the attack is occurring, it's a panic, and everyone do all the things, and the communication is very difficult because there are a lot of pressure, and so you have to anticipate and say, okay, if I have an attack, this guy is responsible for this stuff, this other guy is for this one extra. Everyone has his responsibility and his plan. This list of action to do if there is an attack. This is the first thing. The different goals are first to restore services. So it's, if you remember, the DICT, availability, integrity, confidentiality, traceability. If the availability is important, you have to restore services as fast as possible. So this is the first thing. The second thing is to minimize losses. It's to block the attack, to ensure data is not leaked, to ensure there is no impact during the attack. So you have to block block the attack. And the last thing is to not destroy potential proofs that can be useful for further investigation. When the attack will be behind us, we have to analyze, logs, memory dumps, or to know, okay, the attackers enter by this way and go in this component and this one, and he stole this data and not this, is very important. If it's the panic, everyone want to shut down servers and restart, and and everything is purged, or and everything is lost, and it's very difficult to analyze. This is your first question. The second one is at which level is it? It's complex, but there are two levels. The company levels, which has maybe multiple applications. I don't know. And in this plan, the main goal is to ensure business will continue even if there is an attack. So it's high level. Maybe, I don't know, but a basic plan is, okay, we don't have computer and network and inside the network, and everything is down and not accessible. Okay, we take paper and we can continue to work, but with paper. It's you can fall back to paper. So it's not as efficient as computers, but it works and you can continue to work. So at the organization level, you have to think globally about this kind of things and say, okay, this application in my organization is very critical, and if I hasn't this application up, it's not possible we can continue to work. So we have to put effort on this application. This is at the organizational level. In project level, you have to say, okay, my application is critical. I have to put some different strategy or mechanism to ensure application will have a minimum downtime if there is an attack. So maybe it's okay. I have very frequent backups, and I can restore very quickly my entire environment and in another cloud provider and another data center, I don't know. So you have to plan and say, okay, you have a problem. We don't have the time, and there is a lot of pressure. You don't have the time to think, and you have to execute procedure. Okay, I send the backup to the new data center. Okay, I run the pipeline to deploy my new application and restore data and extra.
Right. It makes total sense, and it's interesting what you're talking about, the different levels and what you're thinking of, because you're really thinking of completely different different objectives. You want a different outcome from it at each level. Is an incident response plan something we need to, should we really frequently think about this? Should we do this, annually, or does the objectives not really change? Like when do we need to review? Is there a trigger that indicates that we need to review our incident response plan?
Again, when there are changes, important changes, you have to adapt your plan. I don't know, you maybe my application is deployed on AWS with S3 bucket well configured, and okay, I decide to move from AWS to GCP. Of course, I have to adapt my plan, because procedure to migrate AWS to another region, or I don't know, it's not the same in AWS and in GCP. So you have to adapt, of course. One other thing is to test the plan. you can't just write the procedure and okay, we will test it when we will need. No, it's too late when there is an attack, and so maybe you can try to execute to simulate an attack annually, or again, it depends on the context.
Yeah, definitely. So the fire drill scenario is if we don't want panic to set in, we have to rehearse these and know it. Yes, it reminds me of I was on a boat once, and we ran over a buoy. A rope got stuck in the propeller, and we all have talked about what we'd do in this situation, and none of us did it. We all just panicked and completely did it. Luckily, nothing happened. But once we finished that, we kind of realized that, okay, this is when an accident really could have happened, because we said we'll do these things, but we had no idea. And it's the same for security, is that yes. You have no idea how you're going to react in the situation. So you need to plan for it.
You have to be ready, yes.
Right, so we've talked a whole lot, in this software development lifecycle. But if we want to go further, like what are some other tools that we hit? I see here you've got mentioned Open SAM. What's this, and what when should we be looking into implementing these additional steps?
Open SAM, is very interesting to evaluate, to assess your current level of maturity. So you can have an idea to say, okay, I set up static tools, dynamic tools, I set up a process to make code reviews, etc., etc. But you have to, it's good idea, but you have to assess your level of maturity. You say, okay, with this kind of stuff in place, I am very, very mature, or I think I am mature, but I'm not really. So OpenSAM is like you have a lot of questions and you have to answer, and at the end it makes a different score on different category: governance, security, requirements, run, etc., etc. And you have a plan to improve yourself in these categories. So it's very interesting. It's very easy to answer this response. One of the questions, for example, is, okay, are my developers aware of security? And there are possible responses. The first one is no. The second one is yes. 5 years ago, they had a training about security, so it's better than nothing. But 5 years ago, it's a bit far. And the third level, for example, is okay. Each year, my developer needs to attend the training about security. And yes, at the formation training about security. So there are 3 steps: level 0, nothing, and level 1. It's one level of maturity, and the second one is better than the first one. So it's very interesting to know where you are in your security. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great exercise that all organizations should be doing, because it's hard to always know where you sit and how secure you are, and sometimes you can think that you have a high level of maturity in your security, and then turns out that there's multiple areas to improve on. So it's a great tool, I think, that you outline.
Yes, and sometimes you make a lot of money in maybe tools like dynamic and static tools. So you have maybe the highest level of maturity in this category, but you have completely forgotten another one. And I think it's better to have a medium level in all categories than one category with the highest level and one with 0. So it's interesting to have a big picture of your security plan and stuff in place. Yes.
Absolutely. Now, this is an area that I always get confused on. So we've talked about static analysis, we've talked about dynamic analysis, and then there's some other tools here. Interactive application security testing, IAST, runtime application security testing. What are these? How are they different to static and dynamic testing?
Yes. Before understanding what are the advantage of these tools, again, SAST and DAST, you have to remember that the main drawback of static analysis is false positives. And the main drawback of dynamic is black box testing. Dynamic tool doesn't see what happens inside your application. This is the two first things to remember. For the definitions, the first one, IAST, Interactive Application Security Testing, is deployed in a testing environment and not in production. RASP, Runtime Application Self-Protection, is deployed to production. This is the first difference between the two tools. The mechanism in place is almost the same in IAST and RASP. The definition is, okay, I have my application in, I don't know, any technologies, and I set up, there are multiple ways to do that, but an agent, a new dependency in my project, a RASP dependency, okay, and this agent will monitor everything happens in the application. One basic example is, okay, my applications needs to communicate to a SQL database to retrieve data and deal with them. Okay, my SQL queries is built select star from I don't know where ID equal an ID, and my ID is coming from query parameter in URL. Again, my comments module, and I have to change pages extra. So the RASP or IAST agent will monitor and say, okay, I expect to see a query select star from table where's my n, where ID equal an integer. So it's 8 words in the SQL queries. You say, okay, I expect to see 8 words. During the executions, if there is during normal use cases, people will change pages, page 2, page 1, page 2, page 3. It's always 8 words in my SQL query. If someone tried to inject a payload to make a SQL injection, it will be more than 8 words in my SQL queries. No, because select star table from ID where ID equal integer, or 1 equal 1, for example. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's 12. So IAST and RASP, you said, okay, there is a problem. I expect 8 words, there are 12. This is the basic. So it works for XSS and other stuff, other vulnerabilities, but it's a principle. This agent see how the application works from the inside, and see everything that data and calls and other things that happens during runtime. In Yast, like I said, it's not for a production environment, so the goal is to report to developers or security teams, okay, there had a problem, there were a problem, with this request, and there are a lot of details, and so Yast is the main goal of Yast is to report stuff and help developers to fix the problem. Rasp is more for is for production and works with two modes. The first one is just monitoring or audit. So it doesn't block anything, but say, okay, I saw a 12 words query with this payload. There are no more details. It's less detailed than Yast reports. So this is the first mode, audit, and the other mode is block. Okay, the application is trying to execute a 12 words SQL query. It's not normal, I have to block it. The main drawback with Rasp is performance. Because there is instrumentation of everything that happens in your application. And I haven't the count in my head, but we have really consequences on performance.
Right. Okay. Finally makes me that the differences between all these tools, because I have for such a long time not quite understood the difference between kind of the interactive application testing and dynamic application testing, and your definition of that black box, right, where it doesn't understand what's actually going on, I think really helps with that. And with the runtime is that we're trying to block real malicious attempts that are happening, and putting up additional protections against that.
Yes.
And I mean, this has been a fascinating journey to go on with you, Aymeric. But for people that are listening and reading this, what are some tools that or some additional resources to further? Where can we go to learn more, about the security?
Yes, the Bible is OWASP. You have to remember that there are everything on OWASP website. I can also mention SANS, SANS Institute, which have a lot of guide. After there are a lot of resources on the internet, but not especially one website. For developers who listen, maybe trying to read OWASP cheat sheet. It's not a huge amount of text with a lot of details, and the goal is not to be a security expert, but to know best practices, and say, okay, I have to implement this kind of functionality in this technology. Okay, I have to think about that, and that. I want to, I want to filter my inputs. Okay, what can I do for that? It's a cheat sheet, so it's very simple and very small. And it's I think, the best resource for developers. This is my advice.
Well, and I think the key takeaway here, the quote of the day is that we're not trying to become experts in this, but we need to understand best practices. And because it's daunting. It's daunting. Security is a huge task, and it's very easy to try and ignore it. But we don't need to become experts in this. We have tools, we have resources to help us, but we need to be aware of it to be able to implement. Yeah. Well, Aymeric, it's been fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And I look forward to implementing some of the things that we've talked about and working on this in the future.